Okay, so Marvel is officially rebooting the X-Men, and it's okay, right? I'll let you guys be the judge of this whole thing. So this initially opens up, it says X months after the fall of Krakoa, so some period of time. X likely means 10 here. For those of you guys who do need to get caught back up, I have a single video that will tell you everything that happened over the Krakoan saga, so you can basically get caught up on your own. But the idea here is that the X-Men are like 20 minutes outside of a town called Merle in Alaska, just kind of existing in solitude. And initially you have the police chief of the town of Merle who ends up visiting Beast. And he kind of gives her a little bit of a tour in the sense that she's somewhat of our eyes and ears as the audience in learning about how things work for the mutant population here in Alaska. But that's not really the meat and potatoes of it. It's what you would expect when it comes to the X-Men. What is cool here is you pick up in Santa Marco with the new X-Men field team, which initially consists of Quentin Quire, Cyclops, and PSYLOKKE alongside Illyana Rasputin, Temper, and Juggernaut. Now, of course, most all of you guys know who Cyclops is and Juggernaut. There's no real explanation that's needed. Temper, and I hate to put it this way, is basically a poor man's Iceman, if we're being honest, right? Illyana Rasputin, for a lot of you guys who are inexperienced, is the sister of Colossus. She's wildly powerful when it comes to magic, and she's been part of the X-Men for a long time, decades and decades in Marvel Comics. PSYLOKKE, of course, is basically the sister of Captain Britain. She's a really, really powerful telepath. Quentin Quire is an Omega level telepath, so he's the most powerful telepath on the team. And so this roster is kind of funky because you don't normally see two overpowered telepaths on the same X-Men team. You have, but it's not really a consistent thing. So this roster is very different from what we're traditionally used to. But the other part of this is that this X-Men team is responding to basically a distress call, right? Like it's a field mission. Now, for those of you guys who are also familiar with a lot of history of the X-Men, specifically Grant Morrison's run, you're actually going to see the return of John Sublime here. And that's going to be really, really cool. I'll explain it for the uninitiated once we get to that point, but it's a really, really cool thing, right? And something that you end up getting, which is referred to as the fourth school. But jumping back to Beast and the Skrull for a second, the only real takeaway from what's going on here is that the X-Men have decided to take up residence in what used to be a factory that produced Sentinels. And them operating there is one part kind of you as humanity owe us, that kind of a thing. And you're actually going to see a little bit of a call out to that once we get to the end of it. But the other part of that is it allows them to just kind of stay in an isolated part of the world, not that dissimilar from Krakoa. So there's a few different reasons why they do this, but in reality, this is probably because in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, they're just going to say the X-Men have been over there this whole time and nobody knew about them, which I don't necessarily think is the worst thing, but it depends on how they handle it. What is important here is you switch back over to this field mission with the X-Men, and you basically have these guys who are essentially talking to each other. They almost look like advanced idea mechanics scientists. They're not. We'll figure out more about them, but they basically have Wolverine strung up. And I'm not going to lie to you guys, as soon as I saw this, the first thing that I thought was that it was Dark Beast. I was like, are they really bringing back Dark Beast? They just brought back Holocaust in Era of Apocalypse, so I guess it would make sense they would bring back Dark Beast, right? This evil version of Beast from an alternate universe like Age of Apocalypse. It'd be cool if they did, to be honest with you guys, but it's just Wolverine, and they're basically running a mission, because what ended up happening here is there was basically a detection on Cerebro that there were like 6 mutants here, and so Wolverine was in the area, Wolverine was sent in, Wolverine disappeared, and then sent out a psychic SOS, and that's why the X-Men are responding. And so we kind of get to see their powers put on display, but this is for the most part small-time stuff, at least it seems to be on the surface, that with a roster like this, I mean, these are some heavy hitters. This X-Men roster alone would be more than enough for the Avengers. Juggernaut could easily handle the Incredible Hulk, and PSYLOKKE and Quentin Quire, they could take out pretty much anybody else. Just those 3 would be enough. And then you have Cyclops running support with his optic blast and so on and so forth. But one of the things that we learn about is the fourth school, in the sense that the fourth school is this concept that came in the aftermath of the fall of ORCHIS, that as we're told, after artificial intelligence betrayed the human parts of ORCHIS, which was this giant anti-mutant organization, that fourth school spread like crazy through what was left. And that is kind of a mishmash of ORCHIS science propaganda and half-baked John Sublime xmen memes. And so it gives us a little bit of insight, but not a whole lot. Another expansion of this comes by way of Temper, where she says Fourth School believes that the third species predicted by John Sublime is actually artificial intelligence itself. And so they need to become the fourth species, a mix of human, AI, and mutant. Now, sidetrack from this story for a second, let's talk about John Sublime. So in Marvel Comics, John Sublime was an introduction during Grant Morrison's new X-Men, and the U-Men are basically his kind of foes, henchmen, if you want to call it that. But the idea behind John Sublime is he's exceedingly old. He's been around for billions and billions of years, but he's not actually a person. John Sublime is a bacterial entity that exists out there in the world. And what Sublime realized very early on is that it had the ability to jump from one human being to the next, one sentient organism to the next. But Mutant stood in the face of that. And so what Sublime did in realizing this, right, over the years, starting with Selene, going into Apocalypse, and these various mutants that were rising up in number, proto-mutants like Gabriel Shepherd, who is ridiculously overpowered, that John Sublime saw mutants as a credible threat to its existence. And so what John Sublime did is it started putting together and assembling a force out there that could basically stop the mutant population, destroy the mutant population. And that was the origins of Weapons Plus, at least as Grant Morrison put it together. And so under the direction of John Sublime, Weapons Plus started out with Weapon 1, also known as Captain America, and just ran forward from there, which included Wolverine, Deadpool, the Stepford Cuckoos, who were like these teenage clones of Emma Frost. It was really cool the way the whole thing played out. It's actually the most complex origin for Weapons Plus and Wolverine, Captain America, all that kind of stuff that's really ever been done in Marvel Comics. In recent years, Marvel kept some of it and got rid of the rest, so it looks like Ryan Stegman and Jed MacKay are kind of going back to this old school method of really Grant Morrison's run, because even the art style looks familiar to it. But what we also end up learning here is that for the Fourth School, in order to attain, and this is pretty gross, in order to attain the mutant gene, they actually consume the flesh of mutants. Is literally what they do. They eat them in order to attain their abilities. And for the most part, it works, because what you get is Quentin Quire and Temper who end up entering into this main base of operations, kind of the inner bunker. And there is a little bit of back and forth banter, right? Where Quentin Quire talks about how he used to take kick at one point in time, which is a drug that he used that amplified his powers, about how Cyclops had failed them both when they were on Krakoa as well as the years leading up to Krakoa, different things along those lines. But by and large, just trying to kind of atone for a lot of the mistakes that he made during his time on Krakoa. But all of it comes to a head when these 6 mutant gene spliced guys show up and literally just start attacking everybody. And what you learn right off the bat is that while we don't necessarily get a full-on indication of what they're capable of, what it shows is that X genes can activate in adults. And this is a huge shift from what Marvel has historically done, that the X-Men don't fully understand what's going on here. They do, but they don't. But by and large, whenever it comes to the X gene in Marvel Comics, it only ever really activates under 2 particular instances. One is puberty, which is 99% of the time. The other is moments of high duress, that some 7-year-old kid is riding with his parents down the interstate and they get into a car wreck and his powers kick in and he teleports them 500 yards away, and now you got a teleporter in the Marvel Universe. And so because of that, having X genes that activate into adulthood is incredibly unheard of. There are always rare circumstances. Franklin Richards, the son of Reed Richards of the Fantastic Four, who can alter reality on a universal scale, his powers activated when he was very, very young, when he was a toddler, right? That story where he basically turned himself into Jesus. So there are always exceptions to these things, but in adulthood, that almost never happens, especially when you have 6 activating at once. And so again, while we don't get like a full front explanation of what these guys' powers are in relation to like what they can do, contextually, we do get a few indicators. For example, like one of these guys seems to have some measure of like enhanced durability and strength, so much so that he's completely and totally unaffected by the punch of Juggernaut, which is a pretty huge deal. The Juggernaut can like take out the Hulk or Thor given enough time, and he's more than enough to KO most anybody else in one hit. And then seemingly this guy creates a gravity well, right? So this guy's powers are probably more like like graviton or something like that. Whether it's an actual gravity well, not entirely sure. It literally just looks like magic is being pulled towards the center of this thing. But one of these other guys can liquefy himself. There's one guy that can emit some kind of seemingly electrical energy. So again, it just kind of goes back and forth, and we don't necessarily get a full explanation on here. What is important is that it's showing that this group, the Fourth School, is an organization out there where they figured out a way to give themselves mutant powers. Now, here's the kicker behind it all, and this is the real question to ask. Is it random, or can they choose? Because when it comes to the X-Men, when it comes to traditional mutants, it's random. Who knows what kind of power you're gonna get when your X gene kicks in? Whereas if you could choose what kind of power you get outside of, MacGuffins like reality warping, that would actually be pretty dope. But all in all, what ends up happening is these guys effectively teleport out. Right? Like they're literally yanked out of there. And so following that, once everybody basically gets back to the factory, the main base of operations for the X-Men, of course, Wolverine bails. And it's not him just kind of being Wolverine. I mean, I guess it is the sort of the way they write him. It's classic Wolverine in the sense that he's always going out and doing his own thing. But it's also predicated on the fall of Krakoa. Because one of the things that was kind of an undercurrent during the Krakoan age for Wolverine as a character is he put so much stock in it, and he put so much investment in it. He finally had a place that he could call home, only for it to all just get blown up. Or, I mean, not really being blown up. It was more the X-Men just kind of being like, oh my God, somebody attacked our home. I guess we can't live here anymore, and then just leaving, right? That's really what it was, right? Somebody threw a rock through their window, and so they all decided to leave and go somewhere else. I mean, that's obviously a very minimizing statement given everything that happened, but still, it's the same principle here. And so Wolverine just kind of takes off, he does his own thing, and then you have a kind of coming together when it came to Cyclops and Magneto and Beast. And one of the things that I hope you're noticing here is there really is no organization when it comes to this team, because one of the other things that we end up learning here is actually that the character Zorn is part of this X-Men roster. Now, Zorn is in and of himself a really, really cool character. It was actually one of these funny things where when he was introduced under Grant Morrison, he was supposed to be his own character. And then I feel like it was Chuck Austin who came out and said actually Zorn was Magneto in disguise. But Zorn, in a lot of ways, had the same powers as Magneto, right? The ability to manipulate the electromagnetic spectrum, but he could also manipulate light, he could manipulate gravity, he had a healing factor. But in effect, the reason why he wears that helmet is because he actually has a star under it, like a miniature star. So if you were to take it off, who the heck knows what would happen? Presumably it would kill everybody. But the fact is, kind of jumping back to this kind of broader perspective here, I hope you guys notice this is all just very hodgepodge. There's no real leadership structure here. I mean, I guess you do have Magneto kind of running the show, but it doesn't feel anywhere near as organized as we would traditionally expect with the X-Men. And that kind of fits into the whole idea of from the ashes, the X-Men are rebuilding after everything that happened with the fall of Krakoa. So that's why I say, I mean, it's cool, but it's not like, wow, this is just a phenomenal start to the X-Men. It's just kind of what you would expect with regards to the fact that we're likely going to get a major X-Men announcement at San Diego Comic-Con. You got Deadpool and Wolverine coming out, right? All that kind of stuff. A lot of people who would traditionally or who have historically not read the X-Men comics, this is supposed to be a jumping on platform. So that's why it feels like a brand new X-Men, a rebooted X-Men, as opposed to like continuing on from the Krakoan age. So let me know what you guys think down in the comment section, right? Not a terrible story. It's a reasonable start, but nothing to run home about. And yeah, I will catch you all later. Peace.